and both at the expense of indigenous African religions. This demographic windfall, to call it that way, has consequences for the fortunes of the church. By 2050, for example, it is projected that of the 10 largest populations of French-speaking Catholics and English-speaking Catholics, 5 would be in African countries. The fourth observation is that whereas the concern in the global north, if you look at it, seems to focus on the grain and moribund features of religion, the concerns of Africa, or in Africa, relate more to the growing and vibrant roles of religion in public life, and how to negotiate this role in the context of sectarianism, religious fundamentalism, and doctrinal differences. The fifth point: Africa is a land of plenty. The continent has a huge quantity of natural resources and extractive and mineral resources, many of which remain buried and untapped. Think of it. If mineral resources were milk and natural resources honey, you could well conclude that this is a continent flowing with milk and honey. Now here lies the paradox. The exploitation of the continent, its stunted development, its history of violent wars and conflict, and its endemic corruption can be traced directly to the continent's abundant natural resources. Africa is a continent of unfulfilled potential. Rather than becoming a source of growth, Africa's 40% share of the world's natural resources appears more as a curse, a scourge rather than a blessing. The continent remains, by all standards, the poorest place in the world, such that if you consider development as a ladder with many rungs, the conclusion of most analysts and experts in a variety of disciplines is that Africa remains confined to the bottom rung of the development ladder, to quote Jeffrey Sachs. The sixth point: the continent has not been particularly kind to its population. Besides the man-made challenges besetting the continent, some of which I have just alluded to, a variety of natural disasters and diseases continue to convulse and to blight the lives of Africans. Take, for example, malaria. This mosquito-borne disease affects roughly 500 million people worldwide annually, of which at least 1 million, mostly children living in Africa, will die of the disease. It is no different for HIV and AIDS. Bill Gates once called malaria the worst thing on the planet. Now, some of the worst things on the planet are found on the continent of Africa. Yet, we need to be very careful in attributing blame for Africa's woes and misfortunes to dark and sinister forces. The gods are not to blame. The question is, how do we, or how should we, read these facts about Africa? I would like to point out that when it comes to Africa, we are dealing with a complicated and a very complex reality. The continent does not lend itself to any easy interpretation. Now, the complex hermeneutics of Africa was not lost on the African Synod of October 2009, to which Julia just referred. And here's how the Synod talks about the complexity and paradox of the continent. According to the Synod, rich in human and natural resources, many of our people in Africa are still left to wallow in poverty and misery, wars and conflicts, crisis and chaos. These are very rarely caused by natural disasters. They are largely due to human decisions and activities by people with very little regard for the common good, and this often through a tragic complicity and criminal conspiracy of local leaders and foreign interests. Now, this same Synod continues by saying, there is so much good news in many parts. Nations have emerged from long years of war and are moving gradually along the path of peace and prosperity. Good governance is making an appreciable positive impact on some African nations, challenging others to review past and present bad habits. Signals abound of many initiatives seeking to bring effective solutions to our problems. End of quote. Against this background, I would like now to address the topic of church and politics in Africa. Understandably, I intend to do this from the perspective of my Catholic tradition, but with due attention to other churches and religions on the continent and how they stand in relation to politics in Africa. The political map of Africa is as diverse as its religious and ecclesiastical or ecclesial configurations. Africa is a medley of socio-political, economic, and religious dimensions, characteristics, contradictions, and extremes. I would like to explore some of its common traits. The first is its history. History is a very important key for unlocking the meaning and practice of politics in Africa. Contemporary politics in Africa owes its shape and character to the checkered history of the country. Africa's modern political history originates largely in the encounter with colonial powers. And as we know, all the major powers, including Britain, Germany, Italy, Portugal, France, Belgium, all had significant territorial claims to Africa in a process that history has documented as the scramble for or the partition of Africa. The legacies of this colonial past remain embedded in the languages, cultures, economics, and politics of Africa. And to offer one example of this process, at the time of independence, many African countries simply replicated and adapted the systems of governance bequeathed by the colonial powers. The rates of success may vary, but the reality remains the same. In the modern sense of the term, politics has a short history in Africa. I mean by this to say that the history of the continent's independence and political self-determination is a relatively short one, vis-a-vis the burden of expectation often placed on Africa. Even much shorter is the continent's experimentation with democratic governance